Hi, everyone, and welcome to our weekly Q&A. Coach Chris is with us. Welcome back.
Thank you, Daniel. I'm glad to be on as always.
How are you today?
I'm good, not too bad. How are you?
I'm pretty good, pretty good. And for those of you who don't know, Coach Chris, you're in Florida. How's the weather down there in Florida?
It's warming up quite a bit. I
Right.
was just telling my wife, I stepped outside this morning to grab my mail, and it's like, did someone just automatically turn on the heater? It's like out of nowhere. It's just super hot.
I hear it in Oregon. It's getting hot here too. Actually, it feels like we skipped spring. It just went from like winter to summer here.
Yeah, you've got that dry heat though, no humidity.
Yeah.
Yeah, here you'll sweat for sure. I think you experienced it a bit when you were here in Florida a few weeks ago, right?
Yeah, I
Kind of
was. And then for people who hear this might be like, oh, well, what was Daniel doing in Florida?
right.
Yeah, I was. I've shared this a little bit on Instagram. We're starting to film this docu series, where we follow one one student who has insomnia, and I met with him once, and the idea is to come document this whole journey of the coaching calls, the interactions, and then see how things progress. But yeah, it was in Florida, and it was actually quite nice. The weather was nice then back a few months ago. I got a sense of that it could be hot, but it was nice. And the hotel where I stayed had this a little pond behind it, and it said please don't feed the alligators, which was like so exotic to me. I'm like, wow, they have alligators here. That's so cool.
Yeah, definitely got to warn the tourists.
Right. But yeah, what else? Otherwise, how are things going on your end, Chris? Are you working with bedtime, and are you also working on your own website too? And how are things going in general?
Yeah, things are pretty good. Juggling quite a few endeavors, sleep coaching. I still have my pest control business here in Florida. It's for sale if anyone wants to buy it. Just kidding. It is for sale though. I'm looking to dive full time into sleep coaching. Working with bedtime app part time and also sleep coaching on my own, and it's going good. I'm really enjoying it.
That's nice. So glad to hear. All right. Well, that said, we do have one question so far, but anyone who's here on this call, as you know, just put in your questions in the comment section, and we will get to them. And we will check in with Brandon. And actually, Brandon, this is funny. I was thinking of you, Brandon, and I'm going to send you a message on Twitter on the topic that we discussed. And I just, I don't think there's any secret. Brandon actually reached out to me and said he would want to think of helping out in terms of the social media managing and things like that. So, yes. So with that said, Brandon says, "Hi, coaches. How do I get over the mental slump of waking up after a few hours and not being able to fall back asleep? I fall asleep, no problem, but then wake up 3 to 5 hours later and can't get back. It's been this way for 9 months, and I don't know what the reason is." Yeah, so I think, again, Brandon's falling asleep without any struggle, wakes up 3 to 5 hours later, not falling back asleep. What do you think when you hear this, Chris?
Well, like most things with insomnia, it's pretty normal. From what we hear all the time, what I experienced myself. Um, Us humans, we wake up multiple times, per night. I'm not sure what the average number is. I know it's quite a bit. With insomnia, however, we tend to notice those awakenings more just because we are kind of predisposed to being in a hyper aroused state. We've become accustomed to being on high alert, if you will, at night. Super frustrating, to say the least. I understand you, Brandon, completely. And you may be wondering, 9 months, I'm, befriending wakefulness to the best of my ability. Why is this still happening rather? It could be various reasons. I think at the end of the day, there could be some residual fear there. But, ultimately, how we respond, how we view those awakenings will essentially determine, how long it sticks around or not. You're right there, Daniel.
Pardon me. Yeah, I'm okay. I'm having these allergies, which sometimes it just tickles my throat and I have to cough. But yeah, no, I have very little to add except, yeah, exactly. normally wake up, and when we don't react to the fact that we're woken up, then we, fall back asleep again. And I think it's always the same. It's like whatever for somebody like Brandon, I'm thinking like whatever led you to not have any struggle falling asleep initially is also what's going to lead you to not having trouble falling back asleep, which is essentially not not struggling to try to force sleep, but just being
Right.
sort of okay with being awake in that moment. And I don't know if this applies to Brandon or not, but sometimes when I hear this, like, oh, 3 to 5 hours later, I'm like, how do you know it's 3 to 5 hours later? And if anybody's like checking the time and measuring and counting, it can be an invitation to let go of that, which can be really helpful.
Yeah, totally. And just to kind of segue off of that briefly,
Yeah.
it's quite common to ask yourself, why is this still happening? It's been 9 months. There could be some monitoring there still. Um, but I think it's one of those things where once you stop questioning why it's still happening, you kind of, diffuse that curiosity, so to speak. You're more willing to stand the chance of actually recovering a bit faster, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, makes total sense. It's like when we no longer wonder, it's there's curiosity is often the source of hyperarousal and
Right.
some struggle. Yeah, it makes so much sense. All right, let's check in with Jennifer. Jennifer says, "Hi Daniel, I'm here watching. Thanks for the free content. Anytime. So glad you're here. I have been following Chris as well. Nice. I'm 3 months into my journey and I feel improvement, although my sleep is still in increments. My question is how to train the mind to stop checking the clock. My brain automatically calculates how many hours of sleep I get. Did this happen to you, Chris?"
It did. And I would urge you, if you're checking the time, try not to. For me, going timeless was huge. It was a big turning point in my recovery, because oftentimes I would look at the clock repeatedly throughout the night. Question your brain. Literally talk to it like if it's another entity. Like, how do you know how much time we've been awake? Like, how do you know what time it is? Like, you can't be sure. Like, it wants to know, but it doesn't know for sure. I mean, like, literally question your brain and its ability to know exactly what time it is, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it makes so much sense to me. Like it loves numbers and like trying to have control, but as you said, it doesn't really know. It just throws out these. It's like, oh, it's probably this time. I've probably slept this much. But when we don't confirm that, it
Right.
doesn't know. So we kind of like keep it from getting anything to work with, which can be really helpful. And then the other thing that came to my mind was here is another common question, which is um it could be from a parent who has to kind of like feed their kids, and they say like, well, I have to know what time it is to feed my kids. Or somebody who says, well, what I like to do when I'm awake at night is like, actually I like to watch some Netflix or be on my phone, and then I will see the time. There's no way for me to avoid that. How can I meet that situation? And to me, what I usually reply there is that we can anything we can turn anything really into some sort of like self exploration in a way. And so if we can't not know the time, which is often really helpful, not knowing the time is often really helpful, but if not, that's not practical for us, we can turn this into self exploration. How do we do that? Well, it's sort of like before we see what time it is, we can already then think about like, okay, let me see how I'm going to react when I know what time it is, when I get to know the time again. And then we see what time again it is. And then we can be like, whoa, I felt like a jolt of adrenaline. My heart started beating. And then we're like,
Right.
okay, this just means I'm scared of being awake. There's some fear there. Or we can be like, we see the time and then our brain goes like, oh, then I have so many hours to sleep. It starts doing all this math. And then we can be like, okay, I'm seeing that my brain is trying to do this math. It's attempting to have control. And then also the where we go like, we see the time and we're like, there was no particular reaction. And then we can be like, okay, well, this fear is fading away. So when we become sort of like more observers of ourselves rather than being inside a struggle, can really help. What do you think of that, Chris?
Yeah, that's a great point. Actually, it's something that I had to overcome myself. There came a point where, not looking at the time was kind of unsustainable. That little piece of tape was kind of falling off, and I just was getting sick and tired of covering the time at night. seemed a bit ridiculous after 6 months or so. But yeah, I had to work with that fear. And exactly like you said it, I would have to observe how I would react. And lo and behold, I would check the time and I would feel unsettled. I'd feel nervous. If I only had 2 hours before the sun came up or before my alarm went off, um, I would feel really uneasy. But that gave me an opportunity to work with that fear and go deep within myself and work with whatever thoughts, came at that moment, when it came to knowing the time. So yeah, that's a key point there for sure, Daniel.
Yeah, well said. And let's see. PY is here with us and asks and says the following: I have an intense fear that I will never sleep. I know this is a thought. How can I fade this thought? Like, so how can I make this thought go away? I guess is the question. What do you think, Chris, when you hear this?
Again, another opportunity to go inwards and kind of, I don't want to use the word challenge. Allow the thought, make space for it. And you can do this in many ways. You can actually go there in your mind. You can actually imagine not being able to sleep. And I know that might be a lot to ask, and it might sound kind of scary, but that's kind of the point, putting yourself in that worst case scenario, I think is so powerful, because if you're willing to go there in your mind, then why would your mind keep sending that same thought over and over again if you're a willing participant? You understand what I'm saying? So I think that's huge. But if that's a bit too much in the beginning, then you can actually just kind of go about your days or nights with those thoughts. You can befriend wakefulness, whether it's watching TV, doing a puzzle, with those thoughts. And that's just as good as, the other way, which is actually, facing them head on.
Yeah, so nicely said. And I think, it's kind of silly example, but I often say when I have this question of like, how can I not have this thought, is like, well, try to not think of a pink elephant. And of course we do. So it's kind of just a silly example, but it shows us that when we were trying not to think of something, we do end up thinking about it. And on the flip side, when we're okay with thinking about something, it becomes fleeting. Because as Coach Chris says here, like, thoughts are kind of messages. And when we don't want to hear it, then the brain's like, oh, I got to repeat this. But when we're like, okay, I'm willing to hear it, nothing to repeat. There's no really need to repeat it. So yeah, PY, I hope that was helpful. And we have maybe a quick message from Brad says, looking forward to hearing from Daniel. Yeah, today I'll send you a message. And then Filthy Rich says, great stuff, guys. All caps, thumbs up. Nice having you here. Thank you so much. And yeah, Jennifer has another question for us. She says one more thing. I have a major vacation coming up in September. I'm going to Mexico. Nice. I've considered canceling, but after watching many videos, I refuse to let it control me. Any advice? Nice one. And yeah, I can go first here just for a change and say that I'm so glad. So I'm glad you are looking forward to this trip to Mexico. And I want to say that just sort of like whenever somebody tells me like I'm planning this trip, to me, I always start with us saying like just planning it, just imagining like just imagining taking this trip and planning it is courage, because it can be scary to do that when we have like trouble sleeping. We're like, how are we going to sleep in a new environment? So just planning it is really courageous, and courage is really helpful because, when we struggle with sleep, it's like there is no actual real threat, no actual real danger. It's kind of an imagined danger. And when we're willing to sort of face that danger, then the brain can fully see that, oh, there is actually nothing there. We're not harmed anything. So courage can really help. And I want to say that generally speaking, we've seen this so much, as you know, Chris, that when people actually in our community, students, clients, etc., followers, when they do take that trip, even if they're scared about it, almost always it's helpful, because almost always it leads someone to see that, oh, I can live my life even if I struggle with sleep. And very often it turns out that when they're on this trip, there's so much distraction, so many things happening. We're no longer really engaging with the struggle with sleep, and sleep happens easier. So really, really that happens very often. And then, to add one more little thing is that if anyone hears this and they're like, you know what, I canceled my trip, or I think I am going to cancel my trip. Well, that's just an invitation for self-kindness. Maybe we don't, maybe courage is nice, but we don't want to push ourselves either. So if we do decide to not go, that's okay, just self-kindness. But generally speaking, it's, most of the time I found it really helpful. And the fact that you're thinking of this, and you're thinking of going, Jennifer, makes me really glad. But yeah, Chris, what do you think of this topic?
Yeah, I totally agree. Again, if you find yourself canceling or backing out last minute, don't beat yourself up. It happens. I did it a lot. It has to be doable. It has to be completely doable to you. But in the end, yeah, making that decision is it's a huge step in the right direction. Even if you do cancel, at least you took yourself there for a short while, and that's huge in and of itself. So kudos to you. But yeah, if you can cancel, definitely don't. Plus, Mexico sounds really good. Like, who wants to cancel on that, right?
100%. And actually, Filthy Rich says, Jennifer, where are you from? My family's from Michoacan, so that's nice. And yeah, I guess one more topic that just came up to my mind, which is related to this of traveling, is a situation we often come across is someone who says, "Hey, mostly nowadays I'm actually sleeping okay when I'm at home and nothing's going on, but when I have a trip planned or something else is happening, then I have struggle. It feels like this is like the last, like this is like the final hurdle for me to get over." We hear that very often, and to me, for anyone out there for whom this is familiar, to me, it really is an invitation to look back upon those other hurdles that came before this final hurdle and see, like, how did we, how did that not become, like, how did we leave that struggle? Was it that we learned how to jump over the hurdles? It really isn't, because it's never about like forcing anything or making something happen. It really is that those other hurdles, they sort of just disappeared when we no longer tried jumping over them or looked at them as something we needed to jump over or do something about. And it's an invitation for me to see that it's the same thing with the final hurdle. It's sort of like, it's not a final jump we need to do. It's more like it's a sort of a final invitation to let go of this one too. Like, yeah, it's maybe I'll have some struggle on this trip. Maybe it'll be a little bit harder for me to sleep while as I have a big presentation to work or something like that. And that's okay. I'll be fine. It's kind of a final invitation to let go. That's how I think of that. But do you come across that situation sometimes, Chris, or how do you think about that one?
For sure. For me, it's just one of the many layers of this onion we call insomnia. And at the end of the day, we peel each one back the same way, pretty much. Whether it's fast or slow, it's okay. But essentially, it's just about being okay with being awake at night and how you're going to feel the next day. And traveling is no different. Anytime you make any changes in your routine, you're naturally just going to monitor things a little more intensely. So just being aware and knowing that that's part of the process, I think is really important here.
Yeah, that's right. Really helpful. This is something, I don't know who brought this up recently. It was Alina or it was Veronica maybe, but how like oftentimes when we travel somewhere, normally our first night is a little, like we sleep a little less the first night,
Yep.
just because we're in a new environment. And that doesn't mean anything. It's often when we sleep a little bit less the first night, and then we think, oh, this means I'm going to have trouble sleeping, or this means I have to do something. Then maybe we'll have a little bit of struggle. But we see like, oh, the fact that we have a little choppy sleep the first night, just totally normal. We don't do anything about it. And it's everything else, when we don't react to it, it just fades by itself. And the onion, yeah, I love the onion analogy. It's like, it's about that, like inner, like peeling the onion is like going deeper inside, learning more about ourselves. And like onions are like, they can make us cry. It can be quite painful. Like the onion part of it, right?
Right. Yeah. And we like to, we like to look at insomnia as like this big enigma, like it's one thing after another, but really it's not. It's the same fear, being presented in different ways. So sometimes we need to kind of simplify it and see it for what it really is.
100%. All right, let's see. I was just about to say we'll round up there, but we have one more question here. How do you think the closest people to insomnia should react? Very nice and insightful question. It's funny because this is you, Chris. You literally just a few weeks ago said, "Hey, maybe we should have like a support group for partners, etc." But yeah, so what do you think when you hear this one from Pelin?
That's a great question. It's one we don't hear a lot, right? Um, I think it's hard for anyone that doesn't have insomnia to understand what one that has it is really going through, because for them it might seem like it's something that isn't within your control, but it really isn't. Um, so we kind of have to forgive them, if you will, for their ignorance, because they just really don't know, and it's not their fault. Ideally, you would want somebody to be patient with you, compassionate, um, and really as supportive as they can. And I would urge you that if you do have family members who are having a hard time, being there for you and holding space for you, maybe you can kind of nudge them on the channel, or if you have any literature, have them read a little bit of it and kind of educate them so that they know the extent of what you're going through, because not everybody does, and that's just the bottom line.
Yeah, exactly. And I think just to add to that is like, oftentimes we hear the story of like, oh, my my mother, I don't know, my mom or my sister, they're telling me to try this and try this and try that, which can be really tricky. So I'd say for anyone who's a partner or somebody who struggles with sleep, like, be mindful that, so you don't like just throw out suggestions and lead someone into kind of a rabbit hole of like trying more, experimenting more, and having more struggle, and then just kind of like being supportive and listening, and just um, um, yeah, treating that person with kindness. But this is a topic that I think we should explore further. And for anyone out there, we just announced yesterday Within Magazine, which is our new kind of project. So we were actually looking for content about this. So if anyone wants to contribute there, head over to within-magazine.com, and you can talk to our editors. But yeah, this is a topic that we'll talk more about for sure. Really important one. But yeah, with that said, let's conclude here. Thanks to everyone for being with us today. Thanks, Chris, for joining, and
Thanks, Daniel.
see you next time.
Bye, everyone.